let me start by asking you, what do you base your legal claim on here, and what is it you're seeking for your client?
Thank you, Martin. The important point to note here is that the airline itself made the suggestion. We know that this suggestion does not cause any type of undue burden on the airline. It suggested that in order to accommodate Ms. Stanley's religious beliefs, that she coordinate with another flight attendant on duty in order to ensure that whenever a customer asks for alcohol to be served, that the other flight attendant would accommodate that request. That suggestion came by the airline, and she followed that suggestion, that accommodation, to the T, and it worked beautifully. She never had any incident occur. And even at the time of this particular incident where a flight attendant filed a complaint against her, that flight attendant had also agreed to accommodate that request. So there had never been an issue that come up with respect to Ms. Stanley serving alcohol.
But this accommodation apparently has fallen apart for whatever reason, and as a result, the airline is saying now they're not possible, to accommodate in some other way? Would your client be willing to accept, say, some other job with the airline, but not necessarily as a flight attendant?
So what happened here is that Ms. Stanley, upon learning that she, under Islam, the new faith that she accepted, that she cannot serve alcohol, she brought this to the attention of her supervisor. She requested that her faith be accommodated. She did not make any suggestions as to the type of accommodation that would be granted, and her supervisor suggested that she work this arrangement out with other flight attendants prior to each takeoff. Now, this incident that's at discussion right now, another flight attendant accommodated that request. She worked with her. She agreed to provide alcohol whenever another customer asked for it. And there wasn't an issue that came up even that day.
That wasn't my question. Let me go back to what my question was, which was, would she be willing to accept some other position with the airline that doesn't include serving alcohol on the airplane?
What we're asking for is that her employment be reinstated and her reasonable accommodation be reinstated as well. Her request is not asking for much. On that particular
that
day,
depends on the airline. I mean, if you've got two flight attendants, or even just one on some of these small planes, at least that I've seen, that is actually a big accommodation here. So it could depend on the very specific nature of the job she has, which again goes back to my question, would she accept some other job with the company? Because she knew what her faith requirements were, and she knew what the employment circumstance was. Nobody came into this sort of ignorant of what was happening.
Well, the point is here is that our society places upon employers an obligation to accommodate the religious beliefs of its employees. They are required by law to ensure that there is a safe environment in place and that employees can practice their religious beliefs freely. Of course, there are limitations. That accommodation must be reasonable. But what we know here is that this is not an imposition on the airline, because the airline itself made that suggestion and offered that accommodation. There was never any incident. Now, the airline would have to demonstrate to the courts that there has been some change of circumstances that made this accommodation no longer reasonable.
I understand, and I respect the argument that you make when it comes to the conditions that should be allowed for a person's faith. But what my question for the third time is, would she accept some other job with the airline other than being a flight attendant?
She's not required by the law to do that. The law puts the obligation upon the employer to accommodate her religious beliefs, so it's not her obligation
to a reasonable extent. It is not a mandatory requirement. It's to a reasonable extent, and it seems that they have tried to work something out. I'm not sure. Exactly. I'm trying to get from your client whether she is willing to compromise.
What she wants is that her rights under the law be accommodated. In this situation, the law requires that the employer accommodate her beliefs, and she's not required to search for another job in order to have her beliefs accommodated.